Good morning, everybody. The sitting is open. This morning, the agenda calls for the election of 2 judges to the European Court of Human Rights in respect of Iceland and Denmark. The list of candidates and biographical notices are to be found in documents 15685 and Addendum 2 and 15670 and 15671. The voting for each election will take place by individual electronic secret ballot using the Skytel online voting platform. Voting will be between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. today. Each political group has appointed a teller according to the rules. The tellers are from EPP, Ms. Ria Oomen-Ruijten, Socialist, Mr. Stefan Schennach, ALDE, Mr. Robert Troy, ECDA, Mr. Oleksiy Goncharenko, from UEL, Mr. Paul Gavan. I will announce the result of the electronics at this afternoon's sitting. For these first ballots, an absolute majority of the votes is required. If a second round has to be organized, it will take place tomorrow morning. I now declare the ballots open. Please vote. The next item on the agenda is the debate on the report titled Conflict-Related Sexual Violence, document 15677, presented by Ms. Petra Bayer, she is here, on behalf of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. In order to finish by 12 noon, I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 11:30 a.m. to allow time for the reply and vote on the draft resolution. I call Ms. Bayer as rapporteur. You have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end to reply to the debate. The floor is yours, Ms. Bayer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. In my report on conflict-related sexual violence, I enshrine a couple of recommendations on different topics, beginning with, of course, prevention. Prevention of sexual violence in conflicts starts long before a war or long before a conflict. It starts when it comes to education of soldiers. It starts when we see how the gender balance in an army or in police forces are, and that awareness raising on the possibility of sexual violence is made. I also tackle the legal situation because it's so important in this case especially that we really focus not only on the perpetrators who really do a rape, but we also have to be aware that there is a chain of command, and also those who tolerate or even incite such a violence must be held accountable. Of course, there are several documentation requirements of such perpetrations, such atrocities, I would say, because to really have the chance to go to court and to ask for justice at the court requires sensitivity, which is not always easy to have in a situation like a conflict or like a war. Of course, afterwards, the care of survivors, the medical care, the psychological care, the integration into a community again is very sensitive, very important. And here it is also important to mention that sexual and reproductive health and rights services have to be fostered, that you really must have access to institutions, to health institutions, for instance, but also to the legal system, to courts, and of course also in those countries where abortion is banned or forbidden, it is very important for those women who become pregnant because of a rape of a soldier of a hostile army. It's important that they have access to legal and safe abortion. In this regard, the role of NGOs is very important. They not only play a crucial role by counseling survivors, but also play a role in supporting them. And We also see an important role of states, of course. When I look into countries like, for instance, it's not the only one, just as one example, Croatia, who recently decided upon a law where victims, survivors of sexual violence can claim protection and reparation, even if I note that the word reparation is a silly one in this regard, because you cannot repair sexual violence that happened to you. But nevertheless, there's an important role of legislation, and we see it, especially in the case of Croatia, that some women, or many women, only manage to speak about what happened to them decades after it happened, because they are ashamed, because they are not ready to speak about it. And we also have to realize that it's not only women who are victims of sexual violence, it's also men, and men are often even more stigmatized and even more afraid to talk about. And so I think I would recommend that the Council of the Parliamentary Assembly looks into the specific case of male victims of sexual violence in their own report quite soon. I think it would be worth to also report this underreported problem we have. We also have to consider that conflict-related sexual violence is not only a problem in the moment it happens, or even some months later. It is a problem, it has an impact for generations. It has an impact on the cohesion of a society. And if a woman, a pregnant woman, gives birth to a baby where the perpetrator is from the hostile army, then you have a kind of hostility or a kind of enemy within your family, within your society for the next decades, of course. And when we as societies and when we as politicians do not stop this exclusion of children of rape, then we finish the business of those who use rape as a tactic of war. And I want to quote Anja Jusic, who was with us at a hearing in a committee meeting, and she said, "I'm not a child of rape, I'm a child of my mother." And I think that expresses us very well, that we have to accept and respect all children, regardless how the situation was when they started to exist, and we must not fulfill the task of the perpetrators. We also debated in advance whether or whether not conflict-related sexual violence constitutes an element of ethnic cleansing. And in this regard, I would like to quote from a report of the European Parliamentary Forum on Sexual and Reproductive Rights that made a mission to survivors of sexual violence in Western Ukraine and Poland. And let me quote at the end, "And then silence. A friend, Svetlana, gasps and thinks for a moment. Suddenly, she seems to realize what exactly she is saying. She swallows her tears, clears her voice, and continues. Suddenly, her story is not longer about herself, but about a friend. She tells how that friend in the basement of Mariupol was raped by the Russian soldier, while the other soldier held her son and forced him to watch. Svetlana also says that the soldier then turned to rape another woman in the air raid shelter, and that her friend saw the Russian soldier push a gun into the woman's vagina and fired after the rape. He said he wanted to make sure she would never give birth to new Ukrainians again. Colleagues, we must stop that."
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Bayer. Now we continue with the speakers on behalf of the political groups. The first speaker for ALDE group is Ms. Yevgenia Kravchuk from Ukraine.
Mr. Chair, first of all, I would like to thank Petra Bayer for her report, which sadly turned out to be extremely relevant today, of course, because of the war in Ukraine. but it does not influence just Ukrainian women. It's the problem all over the world. And today I'm wearing embroidery made by Kosovo women that were raped during the war. The ongoing aggression against Ukraine has been accompanied by a consistent pattern of sexual violence. This issue, for me as a woman and a mother, is extremely painful, but it's very important that we're not silent about it. The Russian militaries did not choose their victims. Statistics show that those who suffered were both female and male between the ages, just think about it, 4 and 80 years old. Soldiers raped children, their parents, and the elderly, not just because they could. It became actually the instrument of war to discourage resistance of people on the temporary occupied territories. There are cases when husbands or children were forced to watch their wives and mothers being abused, or mothers watched how their children were raped. And as much as we would not like to admit, it is very doubtful that these children could ever fully recover from the trauma. And we will be able to bring hundreds of other abused children, women and men back to completely normal life. What can we do then? It is in our power to mobilize all possible resources by unleashing all possible resources, both at the level of the member states and the Council of Europe, to assist Ukrainian authorities and international investigators to collect evidence of rape and properly qualify them. Also, we might ensure that all those who made these crimes possible by unleashing the unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine were held accountable. Not just the perpetrators that did it on the ground, but this is why it is crucial to establish the ad hoc International Crimean Tribunal for the prosecution of the crime of aggression of political and military leadership of the Russian Federation. We must also work on the establishment of rehab centers, on ensuring that help for those who have suffered sexual violence is accessible and possible to them. I call upon the Council of Europe to provide Ukraine with the necessary assistance to set up such rehabilitation system. Finally, we should raise our voices. It is not customary to talk about sexual violence. Its victims, as noted by Ms. Baer, are often silent, being threatened by social stigma. On the contrary, we should openly support those who suffer from the consequences of sexual violence. It is important their stories must be heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now may I invite Ms. Nikki Ayken to take the floor on behalf of ECDA.
Thank you. I would like to thank the rapporteur for her very powerful report. And I'm very proud that the United Kingdom has been at the vanguard of efforts to combat conflict-related sexual violence for the past decade, since our former Foreign Secretary, Lord Hague, launched the Prevention of Sexual Violence and Conflict initiative in 2012. Yet since then, people's perceptions and awareness of the horrors of warfare have been exasperated. Enabled by the proliferation of social media, we now see the painful realities of conflict in real time. Not only the brutality on the battlefield, but also the devastation invading armies inflict on countries and their civilians. When we think of conflict and of conflict-related sexual violence, this past year has been and continues to be a dark one for Europe. As ever, our thoughts turn to you, our valiant Ukrainian friends, who ask for nothing except to live in peace and freedom. The current situation in Ukraine, as well as events in too many countries, including Afghanistan and Ethiopia, make clear that this issue is very much alive. This being said, I am very proud that the United Kingdom has done and highlighted at the international PSVI conference held in Westminster last year. Here, a decade after the launch of the PSVI initiative, the UK announced a 3-year strategy to tackle conflict-related sexual violence. And I am heartened to see a new partnership between the UK government and the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, which brings a new accountability commission and the task force for survivors, developed by the UK to increase successful prosecutions. This will be practical support in establishing rapid response mechanisms in crises, mentoring prosecutors and advancing support for the UN to strengthen national justice systems. All of this work is rightly evidence-led. The UK's strategy has been meticulously developed by experts, academics and NGOs to tackle all forms of preventing sexual violence in conflict. And by building on these advances to improve the documentation and analysis of these crimes, policymakers can make effectively and can deter, intervene against and prosecute such violence. I absolutely believe we have a duty, all of us, to ensure perpetrators are brought to justice and victims receive clear support. However, we can have as many of these policies in place as we like, but they must be enforceable, and the people responsible for these heinous crimes must be held to account.
Thank you. Now the floor is for Mr. Andreas Uneland from Norway on behalf of UAL Group.
And I would like to compliment the rapporteur for her great work in this important report. And I would like to emphasize that war inflicts damage on all people, the environment, cultures, and civilizations. Aggressors that inflict war on other countries are showing contempt for life itself. And one of the most degrading sides of war is conflict-related sexual violence. It is one of the worst atrocities of war, and it's used to humiliate, violate, and ruin the minds and bodies of victims. Women are commonly victims of these crimes. It is despicable and it is preventable. States, paramilitaries, and soldiers are the perpetrators. These cruelties can be a result of war causing security in society to break down. The absence of police and legal authority increases the risks of all forms of violence and abuse against women and girls. And we have an obligation to prevent these war crimes. A cruel example of where conflict-related sexual violence is happening now is Russia's brutal and illegal invasion of Ukraine. The war is killing thousands. Men and women who have to defend Ukraine are dying. Children are losing their parents and millions are forced to flee, only because of Putin's imperialist ambitions. It is known that rape is used as a weapon in war. And I would like to quote a woman who was held in a basement in Bucha. She was raped, and Russian soldiers told them they would rape them to the point that they wouldn't want sexual contact with any man to prevent them from having Ukrainian children. 25 girls and women in the basement were raped. 9 became pregnant. This woman, she fled to neighboring Poland. There, access to emergency contraception and abortion is practically closed. Although one of 3 exceptions for abortion in Poland is rape, this does not apply as long as the abuse took place outside Poland's borders. This is another violation of her rights. The right to abortion must be protected. Women who have been deprived of control over their own bodies must not be violated again by being denied access to safe abortion. And we are glad that the resolution points out that countries have a responsibility for holding individual perpetrators to account. And we are glad that many countries have initiated universal jurisdiction as a means of prosecuting perpetrators wherever they have committed these horrible crimes. Those who commit such abuse must be held responsible. In addition, all countries must take responsibility for ensuring that the victims are taken care of, that they get the help and can live as fulfilling lives as possible. And one of the important tools to combat violence against women is the Istanbul Convention. It is a shame to see that Turkey, the first country to ratify, 10 years later is the first to leave it. I want to express solidarity with all the women in Turkey who are fighting for their rights, and I encourage Turkey to once again become a part of the Istanbul Convention. President, the resolution we are debating was unanimously adopted by the committee, and that sends a strong message, and I hope that our Assembly will do the same today.
Thank you. Now the floor is for Ms. Saranda Bukuchevci from Assembly of Kosovo on behalf of Socialist Group.
Thank you, dear Chair, dear colleagues. I would like to start actually first by thanking Petra for putting this fantastic report together in such a sensitive, hugely important topic. The details of the report really illustrates very well the situation that we have in relation to the most horrendous and most unpunished crime, that of sexual violence. Coming from a country where women, but not only men, as was mentioned as well, have experienced sexual violence in conflict not such a long ago, I never thought actually that today we would be talking about another country in Europe experiencing the same fate. Looking at what's happening in Ukraine, I do hope that this report would push not only member states to prioritize and to put the resources needed in place to address sexual violence happening in Ukraine by the Russian army. It is not the first time that sexual violence is used as a weapon of war. We've experienced this in the Balkans in the 90s, including, as I said, in my own country. And we have to make sure that those who plan and implement these inhumane strategies are punished, as unfortunately way too often they are not. We have to be firm and determined that those who do these horrific crimes are put in front of tribunals, are put in front of courts, and do take the charges that they deserve in relation to this crime. One of the most elements that when you discuss with survivors is this aspect of the perpetrators not brought to justice. So we have to do more in that relation. We have the instruments in these organizations to support the victims, and we have to do it without hesitation. I also would like to point out another aspect of the report, which I think is really important, is that the survivors are heard. We have many ideas of what we need to put into place, but when you hear the survivors and what their needs are, it's crucial that the steps that we take, it's in relation to those needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I invite Ms. Ria Oomen-Ruijten to take the floor on behalf of EPP Group, if she is in the floor. I don't see her, then we proceed. We proceed with the individual speakers. The first speaker is Ms. Zita Gurmai from Hungary.
Thank you very much, dear Chair, dear colleagues. Human dignity is an inherent attribute we all, as equal members of the human race, possess. Human dignity, as the unity of personality, along with human life, means the essence of humanity. Dignity is an elevated and absolutely respected quality of our human life and values. It is a standard of our human essence. It is a priori value in the same way as life and expresses the human dimension of life. Being a human and human dignity are inseparable from one another. Both are inalienable, immanent, essential properties of humans. There can be no doubt about the essentiality, the basic characters of rape that violates not just the body of the victim, but their very fundamental essence of being, their dignity. The usage of rape as a weapon of war is so inherently against the very founding principle of our democratic society that the perpetrators shall never be allowed to escape justice. They must answer the crimes they have committed. The report precisely and rightfully calls these acts as they are: war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and we absolutely need to treat them as such. Thank you very much, Pater Bayer, you did an excellent job. We must do everything in our power to make sure that the human suffering inflicted by the Russian aggressor of the population of Ukraine is not forgotten, that the victims of war never become faceless numbers in a casualty report, and while we do so, we must ensure to protect everyone we can from the horrors of rape in our own community. Because our humanity doesn't only mean that we are beings with dignity, they should be respected. It also calls upon to show solidarity towards each other, especially towards those who need support and care in their times of need. This solidarity needs to be more than symbolic act of goodwill. They need to be meaningful steps to ensure the protection of human dignity all across our nation. In Hungary, we experience the tragedy that happens when we roll back that solidarity, when the state decides to provide less. Danger of exploitation, such as rape, drastically increase, so does the numbers of cases of such crimes. All that while the size of the support system diminished and victims were less and less likely to get help from the state when needed. The tragic extent of the situation was shown even more when, as a neighboring country to Ukraine, immigrants fleeing the war came to our country and the state apparatus was unable to provide them with protection, help, and cares for weeks. We need to learn from our own example to be more inclusive, to be more caring, and show more solidarity, to create a system that is able to both help the victims of such crimes and make sure that the perpetrators are captured to protect our society from the repetition of such crimes. The report does a fantastic job to extend, makes meaningful and progressive suggestions for the member states to follow, especially in relation to armed forces and their handling of inclusivity and gender-based violence. Dear Petra, dear sister, you did a great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zita. Now the floor is for Mr. Alain Milon from France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mes chers collègues, je remercie tout d'abord notre rapporteur, notre collègue rapporteur pour son rapport qui nous rappelle que les violences sexuelles constituent l'une des pires atrocités de la guerre. Ces violences ont pour objectif d'humilier et de détruire la vie des victimes. Celles-ci sont le plus souvent laissées en vie pour qu'elles puissent raconter leur calvaire et ainsi saper toute forme de résistance à l'envahisseur. Ces violences doivent d'autant plus nous préoccuper aujourd'hui que la Fédération de Russie, dans sa guerre d'agression contre l'Ukraine, développe une stratégie d'humiliation et de terreur. Je crois possible de mettre en place des mesures pour les prévenir. Le recrutement inclusif au sein des forces armées et de la police permettant de garantir un meilleur équilibre entre les hommes et les femmes et la mise en place de formations sont des éléments qui peuvent permettre de lutter contre les violences sexuelles dans le cadre de conflits armés. Mais cela n'est possible que lorsque la guerre n'a pas pour objectif d'éradiquer une population, une culture, ni de terroriser les populations civiles. Dès lors, il est nécessaire de s'assurer que de tels crimes ne demeureront pas impunis, les violences sexuelles étant dès à présent considérées comme des crimes contre l'humanité et des crimes de guerre par le statut de Rome de la Cour pénale internationale. Nous devons encourager la justice de nos pays à ouvrir des enquêtes sur ces crimes lorsque cela est possible, notamment lorsque des citoyens ou des citoyennes et des ressortissants de nos pays sont concernés. Pour ce qui est de la situation en Ukraine, notre Assemblée doit continuer de soutenir la création d'un tribunal international spécial en mesure de juger les crimes commis dans le cadre de l'agression russe contre l'Ukraine. Enfin, nous devons apporter tout notre soutien aux victimes. Celles-ci doivent pouvoir témoigner en toute sécurité des violences qu'elles ont subies. Elles doivent également pouvoir bénéficier des différents soins médicaux dont elles ont besoin et d'un suivi psychologique, voire psychiatrique. Pour répondre à ces besoins, je soutiens la création d'un fonds au profit des victimes de la Cour pénale internationale que les États partis au statut de Rome devront abonder. Ce fonds pourra bénéficier aux victimes de violences sexuelles dans le cadre de conflits armés. Chers collègues, inutile de vous dire que je voterai ce projet de résolution.
Thank you, Mr. Milon. Now I give the floor to Mr. Jean-Pierre Green from Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues. L'excellent rapport de notre collègue Petra Baer met en lumière cet important problème que sont les violences sexuelles liées aux différents conflits et guerres. En plus de dévaster des territoires entiers et de détruire des bâtiments et des infrastructures vitales, les différentes guerres infligent des dommages durables aux personnes, laissant par là des traumatismes individuels, collectifs et familiaux qui persistent durant toute la vie des personnes concernées par ces différentes violences. Les membres des différentes armées qui se permettent d'imposer aux filles et aux femmes de telles violences sexuelles qu'elles en sont marquées pour leur vie entière. Cela est un véritable scandale organisé lors des différents conflits dans des pays dits civilisés. C'est pourquoi cela doit être ouvertement dénoncé, comme cela est fait dans le rapport de notre collègue. La reconnaissance par le statut de Rome de la Cour pénale internationale des violences sexuelles liées au conflit comme crimes contre l'humanité et crimes de guerre a permis de poursuivre des auteurs de ces crimes ainsi que leurs commandements. mais certains restent encore trop souvent impunis. Concernant la prévention de ces violences sexuelles, elle doit être mise en place bien avant l'éclatement des différents conflits. Et c'est pourquoi notre Assemblée, par ce rapport, invite les États membres et les parlements nationaux à œuvrer à la prévention en temps de paix comme dans les situations de guerre. Un autre point relevé dans ce rapport, c'est l'incitation à la violence sexuelle par les commandements militaires visant à inclure le viol, l'esclavage sexuel et la torture comme des indicateurs de succès liés au conflit. Les différentes atrocités révélées par les victimes de ces violences doivent inciter tous les pays du Conseil de l'Europe à dénoncer et lutter pour mettre fin à ces actes de barbarie inhumaine par tous les moyens en leur possession. La compétence universelle est un moyen extrêmement important et efficace pour les États de montrer leur détermination à poursuivre les auteurs de ces crimes de guerre. Elle permet d'instruire et de poursuivre ces violences envers les filles et les femmes, quel que soit le lieu où ils ont été commis, et de traduire en justice leurs auteurs. Plusieurs pays, dont mon pays, la Suisse, ont déclaré leur intention d'utiliser ce moyen pour enquêter et punir ces crimes de guerre lors de l'invasion russe en Ukraine. Les violences sexuelles liées au conflit constituent l'une des pires atrocités de la guerre et une tactique trop souvent utilisée pour humilier et détruire le corps et l'esprit des victimes. Il est du devoir impératif de tous les pays du Conseil de l'Europe de lutter, de réparer par la justice et des programmes de réadaptation, mais surtout de prévenir en temps de paix, comme dans les situations de conflit, ces graves violations de l'intégrité physique et psychique faites envers des femmes innocentes. Prévenir vaut mieux que guérir, car dans les cas de violences sexuelles, la guérison est problématique. Merci de votre attention.
Thank you. Now I invite Ms. Boglarka Iles from Hungary to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, dear guests and delegates. This is my first time here, and this is my first speech as a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. It is a great honor to me to speak with you and discuss with you in that place where our ancestors were on the ball to end the death penalty in Europe, and I think which will not only weather the storm, but plays an active role in making things better. However, we face many crises, and we also have to experience the brutality of a war, and in particular, the conflict-related sexual violence. I would like to ask you, see me not only as a conservative young politician, but as a proud and thankful mother of a 1.5-year-old girl child, and as an engaged woman who was responsible for this area as a dedicated leader for 3 years. So I can fully agree with most of the findings of this report. I can agree with the training of police forces. We in Hungary have already trained more than 5,000 people who work in the operation of our warning system. I can agree with campaigns for prevention, including civil society organizations. We in Hungary have raised public awareness with the Hungarian Interchurch Aid Act Alliance year by year. And I can absolutely support those legal solutions which offer the widest possible procedural safeguards against the impunity of conflict-related sexual violence. Therefore, I have to underline, from 2012, Hungary has applied universal jurisdiction for the most serious international crimes, including war crimes and crimes against humanity. And last but not least, I can agree with the survival-centered approach. But I miss the blameless, harmless, absolutely guiltless, and innocent approach. Because all of us know, conceived fetuses are the most defenseless human beings in this situation so far. And we know we would be less without Aina Jusic, who was admirably mentioned in the report, or the beauty-impressed part of the world, but perhaps mostly Pennsylvania, would miss Valerie Gatto, or those children who found a family in childless pairs thanks to adoption. So I can't agree. Indeed, I disapprove of condemnation of any country that protects human life, especially if that country has received more refugees from Ukraine than any other country in Europe, including the country of the rapporteur. more respect to our Polish friends, more help, mostly, but not only to the survivors, to the really harmless and the youngest. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Ms. Margaret Bower from Netherlands.
Thank you, Chair. And first, I want to thank the rapporteur for this most important report. I will not repeat what's in the report and what's said by so many speakers about the war, the horrors of the war, the need to prevention, prosecution, and protection. I was present at a hearing of the Equality Committee in September, and I was impressed by the testimony of Aina Đusić, president of the Bosnian NGO Forgotten Children of War, who showed us what it is to be a child born out of rape in war. For her mother, and for their relationship. She also made it very clear that being born out of rape is not defining who she is. As Petra clearly states in her report, I am not a child of rape, I am a child of my mother. And this touches the topic I want to bring forward, that of being a survivor and not a victim. The report consequently speaks of survivors instead of victims. This is important because it makes clear that victimhood is not an identity and that victims can be strong and independent persons. But by doing so, we have to be aware that victims don't become survivors just by calling them so. They need to support to overcome victimhood, victim blaming, and secondary victimization. This goes for all victims of sexual violence, as I see in my daily work as a victims lawyer, but even more for victims of sexual violence in wartime. Often they are not only victims of the rape by the perpetrator, but have to face shame or even rejection of their partners and family, as do their children born out of the rape. Often they have difficulty to love themselves again and to love the child that is born. Often they find themselves in difficult circumstances without a good support system. Often they are re-victimized by the legal system that forces them to re-experience their trauma. This can't be solved by just calling them survivors. We have to really support them to become survivors, by providing psychological help, by giving them back the agency regarding their bodies and their lives, by not imposing on them what is best for them, but respecting their boundaries and decisions, even if we do not agree. By providing the means to be able to take care of themselves and their children, housing, education, economic independence, compensation. We should not only call them survivors, we have to shape the conditions so they can be survivors. So, let us do everything that is recommended in the resolution and really put the effort in supporting victims to become survivors. Thank you.
Thank you too. Now may I invite Madame Edith Estrella from Portugal.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues. Tout d'abord, je veux féliciter Petra Bayer pour son excellent travail et remercier son engagement dans la lutte contre la violence à l'égard des femmes et à la promotion de l'égalité des genres. La violence sexuelle liée au conflit est une des pires atrocités de la guerre. Les victimes sont surtout des femmes, des enfants, des personnes handicapées et des minorités. La torture et le viol sont utilisés pour briser, démoraliser et détruire des personnes, des maisons, des familles et des peuples. La violence sexuelle a des graves conséquences sur les systèmes reproducteurs et la santé psychologique des femmes. Dans de nombreux pays et régions, les victimes des violences sexuelles sont stigmatisées en raison des contextes sociaux et culturels. En particulier, les femmes qui sont tombées enceintes à la suite d'un vol sont les plus susceptibles de subir d'autres traumatismes et d'abus de leurs droits, car l'enfant sera considéré comme un enfant de l'ennemi. Il existe des preuves que les crimes de guerre, comme le viol et d'autres formes de violence sexuelle, se passent en Ukraine. La violence sexuelle liée au conflit est un crime contre l'humanité. Mais la violence sexuelle contre les femmes n'arrive pas seulement en temps de guerre. Elle arrive en temps de paix, à la rue, au lieu de travail et au foyer. Même dans les pays qui ne sont pas en guerre, nous avons chaque jour des nouvelles de femmes et de filles victimes d'harcèlement sexuel au travail, violées dans la rue et au foyer. Les femmes et les filles sont persécutées, détenues et tuées dans des pays qui ne respectent pas les droits humains et refusent aux femmes les droits fondamentaux tels que le droit à l'éducation et à la réussite professionnelle. L'Afghanistan, l'Iran, le Pakistan sont des pays ennemis des femmes, mais ils ne sont pas les seuls. Dans les pays en conflit armé, les femmes et les filles subissent les mêmes atrocités que le reste de la population et aussi toutes sortes de violences sexuelles. Rien de tout cela n'est inévitable, peut et doit y être combattu. Ce combat est avec tous les défenseurs des droits humains. Ce combat est avec toutes et tous, femmes et hommes. Ce combat est avec nous. Merci.
Thank you. Now, may I invite Ms. Catarina Ferreira from Portugal.
Dear colleagues, as we know, armed conflicts tend to be a scene of the most horrible crimes. In that context, sexual violence has been systematically used as a war weapon. Besides being a violation of international law, conflict-related sexual violence represents a threat to our collective security. Conflict-related sexual violence is an atrocity that leaves a stain in our conscience as humanity. Despite these considerations, it continues to shock the international community. As this type of crime continues to occur in the most different regions of the world, and right now also in the war in the Ukraine. The recognition of this phenomenon as an international security problem is not sufficient, as this crime is increasingly frequent in contemporary armed conflicts. And we cannot continue to fail in this respect. Although the past decade gave increased attention to women, peace and security, truth is that major analytical and implementation gaps still remain, so this report is foremost important. We are speaking about an international security problem. We are speaking about a war crime. We are speaking about an acceptable atrocity. So it is crucial for us to review our efforts to protect unarmed civilians under imminent threat of physical violence. Of course, it will be difficult to immediately eradicate all gender-based violence in conflicts, but we can and we should join efforts in order to reduce its prevalence, namely by creating better response mechanisms and by bringing committers to justice. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Now the floor is for Ms. Sena Nur Çelik from Turkey.
Dear President, dear colleagues, it's very timely for our Assembly to reconsider this issue in the face of horrific reports from Ukraine on the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. Despite the progress made in several countries to put in place legal measures, impunity for wartime sexual violence unfortunately remains the norm and accountability is the rare exception. I congratulate the rapporteur for drafting a comprehensive resolution, not only focusing on supporting the survivors, but also on prevention, prosecution, and reparation for sexual violence in conflict situations. I would like to highlight the important work Turkey has been doing in this respect. Since the start of the conflict, over 4 million refugees arrived in Turkey, including thousands of Syrian survivors of sexual violence by the Assad regime and ISIS, and thousands of Yazidi women who escaped from ISIS slavery in Iraq. In order to address this situation, Turkey implemented extensive capacity building and training programs in cooperation with international institutions and has since been supporting the survivors by providing safe spaces, psychosocial support, unhindered access to health services, sexual and reproductive rights, and rehabilitations, as well as adopting comprehensive measures to prevent early marriages. Much more needs to be done in Europe in this respect, especially in addressing the intense stigma suffered by the survivors, the underreporting, the often neglected issue of supporting male victims of sexual violence, and children born of rape. And I hope that this report will be helpful in this respect. Most importantly, I would like to emphasize that I strongly object to paragraph 34 of the report that mentions PKK, which is recognized as a terrorist group by the European Union, United States, and all European countries, and YPG, which is an affiliate of PKK. Referring to these terrorist organizations without mentioning their terrorist nature appears to be nothing more than a futile attempt to legitimize them and their crimes. PKK has murdered 40,000 Turkish people in the last 40 years. PKK and YPG has launched 2,000 attacks to Turkey from northern Syria since 2020. They carried out the horrific suicide bombing in Taksim last November, murdering 6 and wounding 81 Turkish people in the heart of Istanbul. Several reports of Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and United Nations states that YPG has been committing war crimes in Syria by recruiting child soldiers below 15, kidnapping and abusing women and girls, and using the fight against ISIS as a pretext to expand its territories by forcibly displacing Arab towns. Disregarding the security interests of an important NATO ally and praising a terrorist organization that has a horrific record on women's and children's rights is outrageous and should have no place in a report of this importance. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the floor is for Ms. Andrea Eder-Gitzhalter from Austria.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, sehr geehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Zuerst möchte ich auch meiner österreichischen Kollegin Petra Baer ganz herzlich für diesen so wichtigen Bericht gratulieren. Es ist aus meiner Sicht ganz, ganz bedeutend, dass wir Bewusstsein schaffen für die Problematik und Möglichkeiten, wie wir hier wirklich aktiv werden können. Wir haben es heute schon gehört und ich möchte es trotzdem wiederholen, weil es einfach so eine abscheuliche Sache ist. Diese sexuelle Gewalt im Zusammenhang mit Konflikten ist sicher eine der schlimmsten Gräueltaten des Krieges. Sie wurde und wird bewusst eingesetzt, um den Geist, den Körper dieser Opfer zu schädigen, zu brechen, zu verletzen, zu ruinieren, als Mittel zur Unterdrückung von Völkern. Und das ist ein Kriegsverbrechen im Sinne des Völkerrechts und auch nach Artikel 7 des römischen Status des Internationalen Strafgerichtshofs ein Verbrechen gegen die Menschlichkeit. Und das kann Gott sei Dank geahndet werden, national, international. Diese Verbrecher, diese Täter müssen vor die Gerichte gestellt werden, die müssen ihrer Verantwortung bekommen und bestraft werden. Wir haben gehört, bei der Anhörung am 22. Mai hat Frau Dunja Mijatović, die Menschenrechtskommissarin des Europarates, betont, dass sexuelle Gewalt in Konflikten durch die Entwicklung in der Ukraine ganz oben auf der Agenda des Europarates ist. Und sie hat auch uns gesagt, dass die Verhinderung und Bekämpfung von Gewalt gegen Frauen und häusliche Gewalt, insbesondere durch die Förderung der Ratifizierung und Umsetzung der Istanbul-Konvention, immer noch ein wesentlicher Bestandteil ihrer Arbeit ist. Leider, leider, leider. Es ist sehr traurig, dass wir im Jahre 2023 uns hier in Europa mit dieser Thematik beschäftigen müssen. Und gerade deswegen ist dieser Bericht sehr, sehr wichtig, um das Augenmerk auf dieses Thema sexuelle Gewalt in Konflikten zu richten, um Bewusstsein und Öffentlichkeit zu schaffen. Ein besonderes Augenmerk liegt natürlich in der Betreuung und der Überlebenden. Hier sind die nationalen und internationalen Organisationen gefordert. Das hat Petra Bayer in ihrem Bericht sehr, sehr gut herausgearbeitet, was zu tun ist. Ich möchte alle Mitgliedstaaten auffordern, wirklich hinzusehen, wirklich etwas zu tun, damit diesen Menschen geholfen wird und auf der anderen Seite die Täter ihre gerechte Strafe bekommen. Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Ms. Fiona O'Loughlin. Take the floor. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. Over the last year in this very chamber, we have borne witness to the testimonies of our female battalion from Ukraine, who spoke movingly and compassionately about the absolutely degrading practices that many of their women and, of course, some men have undergone in relation to conflict-related sexual violence, which is the most degrading experience for anyone. And we are talking about rape, we are talking about sexual slavery, we're talking about forced prostitution and other such degrading practices. I really want to compliment the rapporteur, Petra Bayer, in her report. It's incredibly timely, and I think, you know, how she talks about the use of sexual violence in war as a means to spread fear and as a type of ethnic cleansing is important. It's a very timely debate. Her call in terms of looking for support from member states to work on preventing sexual violence in times of both peacetime and times of conflict by implementing national and international policies is very important, by enforcing punishment and empowering vulnerable persons. I echo here her position that preventing this type of gender-based violence has to begin long before the outbreak of armed conflict. We must, and indeed my own country does, maintain strong support for holistic and survivor-centred approaches to prevent and address sexual and gender-based violence. We must also think of the children born as a result of conflict-related sexual violence and put them at the heart of our approach. And this includes promoting access to and providing funding for comprehensive health services, including sexual and reproductive rights, health and rights for women and girl victims and survivors and other protection needs. We must enhance support to grassroots organisations, especially women's rights and women-led organisations, to monitor, prevent and report on gender-based violence. While at the UN, building on progress mainstreaming the agenda of women, peace and security, Ireland has absolutely supported efforts to ensure prevention, monitoring and reporting on a national basis with partners and through the EU. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Now the floor is for Ms. Konul Nurullayeva from Azerbaijan.
Dear Honourable President, distinguished members of the Council, first of all, let me express my immense gratitude to Ms. Petra Bayer for preparing such a detailed and substantial report on the essential issue. The elimination of gender inequality and power imbalances, as well as normative change, are necessary for the prevention of this issue. Dear colleagues, I would like to remind you once again, the Republic of Azerbaijan experienced all the negative aspects of conflict-related sexual violence. Thousands of Azerbaijani women have suffered from different types of sexual violence during the Karabakh War. Additionally, we have plans to execute a national action strategy that identifies a list of requirements for the reconstruction of Karabakh. The core part of the strategy, which will represent the start of a new era, is the return to Karabakh of women whose rights have been violated. Dear colleagues, Armenia, which occupied Azerbaijani territories for 30 years and played the role of murderer of children and women, tries to present itself as an island of democracy. However, the controversial point is the visit of the Armenian Prime Minister's wife to Iran these days. How can we justify her participation in the propaganda campaign of the ruling regime where only first ladies of 10 countries participated? Joining this event held in Iran contradicts the support of Armenia to the collective position of the Western countries on issues of democracy and human rights. Dear colleagues, at the European community, it will be worthy to think of it once again. The Azerbaijani government understands the importance of this topic and supports all initiatives regarding the prevention of sexual violence in armed conflicts. Our government has also developed a legislative framework in this area that complies with international standards, such as the law of the Republic of Azerbaijan on prevention of domestic violence, to emphasize the importance of gender equality in the political, economic, and social spheres of our society. Initially, I recommend the full execution of the government's efforts to provide a more protective legislative and policy framework for women, children, and boys who are at risk, paying particular attention to rural and remote populations and working to end the impunity of sexual assault offenders. Besides, I strongly encourage all parties to make a commitment to preventing and resolving sexual violence that occurs during armed conflict and to enable secure access for humanitarian service providers to deliver aid to individuals who have experienced sexual and gender-based violence. The importance of the provided issue will help to improve its capacity to effectively prosecute cases of this issue and provide reparations, including to survivors in rural and border areas. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Now may I invite Lord Leslie Griffiths from United Kingdom to take the floor.
Chairman and colleagues, it is a duty to stand amongst others in response to this extraordinary report. And I'd share with all those who thus far have highlighted just how horrible the plight of women is when used in this particular way. Also, I'd want to echo all of those who express a determination to bring the perpetrators of these dreadful deeds to justice. Nothing less could suffice. However, there is just one point I'd want to make beyond those two aspects of what's before us right now. In yesterday's debate about the issue of Daesh foreign fighters and their families returning from Syria and other countries, it was pointed out that in many cases such terrorists regained their countries of origin and cases were not brought against them because of a lack of evidence or because they hid behind various other formulae under the head of human rights. And therefore, the point I'd want to make as a direct response to this report is that we need to be sure that whilst this dreadful war is going on, reports are being kept, details are being noted, evidence is being accumulated, and when this war is over, the mass of that evidence can be used in perpetrating through the courts the cases against those who are responsible for these crimes. There's no point expressing our horror no point in telling people that we need justice to operate in cases like this unless we are preparing ourselves now for the need we will have to prosecute the perpetrators of these dreadful deeds. And so in thanking my colleague for her report, and without in any way wanting to qualify it, I hope that she and others might feel that the case I've tried to make so briefly is an important one. Otherwise, all our anger will be dissipated, as too often in the past it has been.
Thank you, sir. Now I give the floor to Ms. Arusshak Yulhakyan from Armenia.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, first of all, let me mention that we can have only facepalm and nothing more while hearing appraisal of democracy from a representative of one of the most autocratic countries of the world, which is fixed in all the reports of the international organizations. However, let me continue with my speech. Dear colleagues, the international humanitarian law protects the dignity of persons involved in armed conflicts both during their lifetime and after death, and prohibits any kind of outrages upon personal dignity. Moreover, under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, committing outrages upon personal dignity constitutes a war crime. The Geneva Convention stipulates that women shall be especially protected against any attack on their owner, in particular against rape or any form of indecent assault. As fairly mentioned in the draft resolution, conflict-related sexual violence is one of the worst atrocities of war, used to humiliate, violate, and ruin the minds and bodies of victims with the intention of spreading fear and breaking the spirit of the oppressed. After the recent aggression in September 2022 by Azerbaijan against Armenia, not only Armenian, but also the international community was shocked by a horrible video spread in the Azerbaijani media outlets. Armenian women who fell into the hands of Azerbaijani armed forces fell victim to the utmost degrading and inhuman treatment. All of the female captives were stripped down to their breasts and left on the field of combat with their chests stripped naked. In one of the videos, a completely nude woman's body was placed in a trophy-like manner above the rest of the nearby corpse. Her breasts and genitals were borne naked as a spectator for witnesses. The perpetrators have left a message, Yashma, on her chest, which is a code name for Azerbaijani specially trained forces. And I will skip all other horrible details, colleagues. The filming and circulating of such operations on media is done for public appraisal and pride. The perpetrators had evidently intended to leave it as a message to the observers, as these videos were seen not only by the Armenian people in general, but also by the 3 children of this female soldier, causing unnecessary suffering and grief to them. And it is worth mentioning that the body of this female service person had not been given to the Armenian side for a long time. Colleagues, the video I am talking about is a concrete evidence of a grave war crime, cruelly committed by the Azerbaijani armed forces and attributable to Azerbaijan. The severe violence of the perpetrators is beyond imagination. Moreover, these gruesome crimes are followed with actions demonstrating extreme cynicism based on the hatred against ethnic Armenians. And this violence is not only gender-based, but also racial-based. Colleagues, it is important to state that the outrage upon the personal dignity constitutes a war crime under the international criminal law, and the perpetrators must be punished as the impunity causes new crimes. It is extremely necessary that the Assembly addresses the issue of sexual violence during the armed conflicts. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the floor is for Ms. Marietta Karamanli from France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Chers collègues, je voulais tout d'abord remercier notre collègue rapporteur Petra Baerbock pour ses constats et propositions s'agissant d'un sujet à la fois important et sensible, celui des violences sexuelles liées au conflit. Elle inscrit ses recommandations dans une quadruple, je dirais, perspective. La définition de ces crimes par le droit international, mais aussi par le champ du genre et des âges concernés à titre principal par ces crimes, les formes diverses qu'ils prennent à l'égard des populations agressées ou victimes par des forces armées émanant de forces de maintien de la paix, les normes d'ores et déjà applicables pour les dissuader et poursuivre les criminels et les mesures à prendre pour aider les victimes. Je partage cette quadruple préoccupation. Je ferai deux observations complémentaires. D'une part, la visibilité des crimes et la punition des auteurs peut et doit s'accompagner de la reconnaissance de la parole donnée aux victimes au travers des processus de dialogue, de médiation, de justice réparatrice, de responsabilités nouvelles et pleines de des différents genres. Je pense en particulier aux femmes dans les organes de police, de justice et d'aide aux victimes. Par ailleurs, le droit à l'indemnisation doit être effectif, ce qui suppose qu'au plan international et dans chaque État des crédits soit budgété, disponible et que leur affectation soit suivie et évaluée. Il faut aussi garantir aux victimes le droit au rapatriement et à la réinstallation lorsque justement les violences dont elles ont été victimes les ont conduites à devoir quitter le lieu de vie ou à être exilées. La rapporteure l'a mentionné, il nous faut avoir un suivi statistique des victimes et des violences. Et j'ajouterai, mes chers collègues, qu'il nous faut parallèlement mieux connaître aujourd'hui la suite donnée à leurs droits et à une vie protégée et aidée. Il y a donc une expérience humaine, voire intime, de la violence sexuelle. Celle-ci doit être combattue à la fois de la répression, mais aussi prévenue par l'éducation et accompagnée par la solidarité. Voilà ce que je voulais partager avec vous ce matin. Merci encore pour ce rapport et ce serait intéressant de pouvoir poursuivre dans ces éléments complémentaires qui ont été apportés. Merci, Petra.
Thanks, Marietta. Now the floor is for Ms. Hatya Dekanoitse from Georgia.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my congratulations to the rapporteurs. Excellent work, and definitely it's very much important, especially for women as we are. And I have to say that the war is a tragedy, and war is a hell for women and girls, for sure. This brutal and unjustified invasion of Ukraine by Russia has once again shown this to the world. Children as young as 4 years old and elders as old as 80 have been confirmed as rape victims in Ukraine. Russia is using rape as a weapon of war, but what only deepens this tragedy is that it's not surprising when we keep our eyes open and realize the aggressive nature of Russian forces. Georgia already faced this several times, including in 2008 and in 90s. In 93, a Georgian girl was raped, murdered, and cut in half in Abkhazia. Another was raped for days before being tortured and executed. Mothers were abused in front of their children, wives in front of their husbands, daughters in front of their parents. Among those civilians, nuns were systematically raped. These were among these hundreds of cases of documented rape in that Russian aggression in Georgia, early 90s. As gruesome as this sounds, we cannot be allowed to forget the crimes those authors continue to use the same methods. The trauma of rape goes beyond conflict. It never leaves a person, a family. Entire generation will be affected long after the war is over and long after Ukraine wins. There is a psychological impact that Russia will have to answer for it. I want to use this tribune today to pay my respect to the victims of sexual violence orchestrated by Russia. And yes, I say orchestrated because there can be no doubt that this level of violence has been planned not just by individual soldiers, but by entire military machine, and it's the leverage of Kremlin and Putin. Rape and sexual violence have followed the Wagner Group everywhere. This is why every member state of the Council of Europe and the Assembly should take steps to call what the Wagner Group really is, a terrorist organization. If we see the definition of terrorism as the use of criminal violence to cause terror and instill fear, there can be no other terminology to describe the criminal organization. I'm a woman, I'm a mother. The fact that these acts of barbarism still exist in the 21st century show me that the world is not safe and will not be safe as long as we don't treat sexual violence as real war crimes. Not only on paper, but in action. Russia must be held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I want to give the floor to Ms. Vasilenko from Ukraine, but I cannot see her. Is she somewhere? Okay.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, I first of all would like to say thank you to Madam Dekanaidze also for raising the points and making such conclusions. And with that, also to say thank you to Madam Petra Bayer. She has done an excellent job at highlighting the problems that come from wars and especially from such crimes as rape. This discussion has done nothing else but to raise awareness about the consequences and long-lasting damage that is caused to the survivors of rape. As the report clearly and rightly points, rape is genocide. Rape is one of the gravest crimes against humanity. Rape is a war crime. These are definitions from international conventions and international tribunals. Conflict-related sexual violence, which I agree to be a more exact term, encompasses the full spectrum of humiliating and violent behavior directed at breaking the body and the spirit of the oppressed. It has been recognized as the ultimate wrong by governments all over the world at UN Security Council level. And yet, in every war, rape is used as a weapon of war. In the case of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, conflict-related sexual violence is more than a weapon. It's not even a tactic, it's a strategy. In the Russian military, there is an equal pride about the number of Ukrainians killed as there is about the number of Ukrainians raped. This glorification of sexual violence is widespread in Russian society. It is everywhere. It's in Putin's speech when he uses phrases like it or not, take it, my beauty, which essentially compares Ukraine to a dead girl, symbolizing some kind of necrophiliac sexual fantasy which is present in Russian folklore songs. It is in the advice that military wives give to their husbands when over the phone and in the intercepted conversations, they say rape as many women as you can, just as long as I don't know about it. It is in orders of Russian military command. It is in systemic practice which shows patterns of gang rape, rape in homes and shelters, rape of parents in front of their children. When the first rape victims came forward and when the bodies of naked women were uncovered in Bucha, I personally was thousands of kilometers out of Ukraine in another country in a parliamentary delegation. Together with my female colleagues, we could not sleep that night when we found out about this, because the fear of it and what the mind imagines is more than the words can tell. What if those rumors about the kill list, the torture lists, the rape lists for Ukrainian members of parliament and government weren't rumors after all? This was happening just kilometers outside of Kiev. These thoughts, although weaker in nature, they came back not once, but many times during the past year, when Kharkiv region was liberated, when Kherson region was liberated, and the thoughts of the many hundreds, maybe thousands more rape victims in occupied, still occupied, Melitopol, Mariupol, Donetsk, Luhansk, Crimea, they are there. So I know that I'm out of time, and I just want to say thank you for the accumulated best practices that Ukraine is taking stock of and can use, drawing from the experience of countries like Bosnia, Croatia. But also, I would like to draw attention as to how hard it is for victims to come forward, how necessary it is to have more women on board of organizations which are investigating and documenting the rape crimes, and also how important it is to have more men participating in this discussion. Out of 49 speakers, only 13 are men. This is 30%. I think we need to increase in it, and we need to have a really gender-balanced discussion around this very delicate but very important and painful topic. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for being generous on the time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Vasylenko. Now I give the floor to Mr. John Howell from United Kingdom.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by congratulating the rapporteur. Congratulating her for not only the way in which she has described these crimes, but introducing the whole concept to us. But we need to be careful in this hemicycle and how we describe these crimes. We need to be careful because under the general term of war crimes, the impact of these crimes are lost. What we are talking about here is a real cause of crime, a real case of evil in the world today. I'm aware that this sort of crime has been going on for years. It has been going on since war was first invented. And if we look back just over the last few years, it occurred in the Second World War. It occurred in Kosovo. It occurred in the Middle East. And it has been described as unfortunate but inevitable. It is not inevitable. And it is about time that we stand up and claim that this is a real crime and we need it expunged. We are not living in the Middle Ages. We are not living even in the Second World War. We are living in a modern world where we need to make it clear that this is unacceptable. If we turn to the situation in Ukraine, we have to decide who is responsible. Is it the individual soldiers and is it their officers that we can complain about? Or is it much broader than that? Is it the Kremlin itself that is ordering people in to do these deeds? Because I think that is an important thing to bear in mind. However we approach this, it must be approached sensitively. In the data collection, we must approach this with great sensitivity to the women who have suffered under this evil. And we must bear in mind that the sort of treatment that they are going to need really is life-enduring for them, both of a mental nature and of a physical nature. This is a very good report, and I think it shows the Council of Europe doing something positive about this, and I thank the rapporteur for all the work that she has put into this.
Thank you, John. Now may I give the floor to Mr. Paul Gavan from Ireland.
Thanks indeed, Mr. Chairperson. I want to begin by warmly congratulating Ms. Petra Bayer on what is a very powerful report. And I want to highlight the context that the rapporteur sets out that these heinous acts are happening within. She states that globally, state and non-state entities are turning away from political and diplomatic solutions towards military force, increasing spending on armaments and reducing spending previously devoted to social and medical services, increasing the vulnerability of women and children. And as the rapporteur herself states, conflict-related sexual violence is one of the worst atrocities of war, systematically used as a tactic to humiliate, violate, and ruin the minds and bodies of victims, as well as intending to spread fear and break the spirit of the oppressed. Details of the horrors meted out to women across a whole range of conflicts are referenced in the report and deserve to have a much wider hearing. But the rapporteur also stresses that some men and many children are also victims of these abhorrent practices that are rightly recognised as war crimes. I particularly welcome the focus of the rapporteur on the specific case of the Yazidi women at the hands of ISIS and the so-called Islamic State in 2014, as well as perpetrating acts of genocide on the Yazidi people from the Kurdish town of Sinjar. Those women who weren't murdered were, and here I'm quoting again from the report, taken captive, married off to the highest bidder, sexually enslaved, and forced to convert. More than 6,000 women were taken captive, and 2,800 are still missing. The rapporteur also highlights many instances of exploitation and abuse by peacekeepers operating in Cambodia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone, Haiti, the Central African Republic and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the current conflict in Ukraine has seen these horrific practices once again to the fore in Europe. And like other speakers, I want to highlight that these victims of the most horrendous abuse and rape are Ukrainian sisters. When they arrive in Poland, they must have access to full health care, including the right to emergency contraception and abortion. The rapporteur also rightly recognises the work of the United Nations, and I want to quickly quote from one of their own reports, which states that for every woman who comes forward to report sexual violence in the midst of a conflict, it's estimated that a further 10 to 20 cases go undocumented. That means, at a conservative estimate, that of the 3,293 UN-verified cases of conflict-related sexual violence in 2021, an additional 32,000 to 65,000 cases go unreported. Finally, in the few seconds I have left, in terms of the recommendations, I want to highlight one in particular. Anyone who reads this report and doesn't think that every country should be signed up to the Istanbul Convention seriously needs to consider an alternative career. It is outrageous that every country is not signed up to the Istanbul Convention, and that change needs to happen now.
Thank you, Paul. Now the floor is for Ms. Ruth Jones from United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I too welcome the report on conflict-related sexual violence, and many thanks to Petra Bayer for her measured and clear report. And of course, I fully support the recommendations. Late last year, the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict Initiative conference was held in London. And at that conference, the political declaration on conflict-related sexual violence was endorsed by 53 countries, including the UK. That political declaration states that conflict-related sexual violence is fundamentally rooted in gender inequality and occurs alongside other forms of gender-based violence before, during and after conflict. I do welcome the UK's government's commitments in that conference, and I note that the political will is there to combat this issue. And this resolution here before us today shows a clear commitment by the European community to continuing addressing conflict-related sexual violence. The resolution rightly notes that documentation, reporting, evidence collection and research are essential in uncovering crimes and prosecuting perpetrators. We saw this issue prominently in 2017 with the removal of thousands of citizen journalists' videos documenting the war in Syria, vital evidence that was removed of thousands of citizens journalists without thought by YouTube, and this led to delays in investigations and in the delivery of justice. The explanatory memorandum accompanying this resolution written by Ms. Bayer is detailed and at times harrowing reading. On the Trust Fund for Victims, the memorandum notes that only 14 of the 123 state parties to the Rome Statute contribute regularly and sustainably to the fund, while 48 make occasional payments, and therefore an increase in these payments is essential. My pledge to this meeting today is that I will raise this with the appropriate government ministers in the next session of the UK Parliament to ensure that our country is doing all we can to support these systems of reparations for victims, and that we're having an open discussion with other countries about the best way for us to play our part in this. But as the memorandum and resolution note, reparations are not justice. 25 years after war crimes in the former Yugoslavia, survivors receive some level of financial support. One survivor in the memorandum states it clearly. I want them to answer for their crimes, to say why they came to Vukovar to kill and rape. Reparations are not justice. Political declarations are only as useful as the political will to carry them through. Actions speak louder than words, and we need to act now, and we can start by fully endorsing this report. Thank you.
Thank you. We are almost out of time. The last speaker will be Ms. Dubravka Luka Filipovski from Serbia.
Chairman, colleagues, women and children are most often victims of sexual violence and human rights trafficking in conflicts. The victims face terrible humiliation and physical and psychological trauma. That is why we must be ready to promote their rights and respond to efforts to improve the help that victims of sexual violence need, as well as to punish the perpetrators. In the 20th century alone, Serbia lost a third of its population in conflicts. During the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, it experienced the large ethnic cleanings in Europe after the Second World War, the trade in the organs of its population from Kosovo and Metohija, and the most monstrous sexual violence against women and children. Thanks to Dick Marty's report of this on the trafficking in human organs of the Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija, and the Yellow House in Albania, as well as the Council of Europe resolution of this serious crime, the trial of the accused in the Hague Tribunal is underway. The concealment and attempt to deny and dispute the crimes against the Serbian people last as long as those crimes. The consequences in the war due to the breakup of the former Yugoslavia are felt even today in the area on the Western Balkans. The number of victims of sexual violence is being manipulated without evidence, which is absolutely reprehensible. The so-called Kosovo is leading the way, telling lies that 20,000 Albanian women were raped. For the sake of truth, the Secretary General's report 964 to the UN Security Council in 2020 states, inter alia, that the Commission of the so-called Kosovo's government in charge of verification and recognition of the states of survivors of sexual violence received 63 applications, bringing the total number of applications received since establishment in February 2018 to date to 1,303 applicants out of 846 applicants, 819 women and 20 men were granted the status of survivors of sexual violence, while 262 persons, 224 women and 38 men were rejected. I believe that this report will help countries to assist rehabilitation on victims of sexual violence in conflict.
Thank you. I must now interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that typewritten text must be submitted electronically no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted, now. I call Ms. Bayer now as rapporteur to reply to the debate in 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you all for your support, for your commitment, and I hope that we will all together get active against this atrocity. I also want to thank Penelope from the Secretariat, who did a great job on this report as well. It was a great cooperation as always. And let me make 3 remarks content-wise. First of all, this morning we appointed the very first male rapporteur on combating violence against women in the history of the Parliamentary Assembly. Evan Eriksson from Norway will for sure make a good job, and it's also related to a report we will debate tomorrow on the role of men and boys when it comes to combating violence in general, violence against women. And I think that's an important sign, an important signal really involve men. Some of you in your debates already mentioned that it is so important to involve and include men. So that's the first step we will do. Secondly, I wanted to point out that, and thank you for mentioning it, the Istanbul Convention is when not now. It's applicable to times of war as well, not only for times of peace. And so I really call on every country who has not yet ratified to do so. I'm very happy that Ukraine did last June. And I just was informed that the implementation is going on. And I think that's really an added value for combating and eradicating violence against women, also when it comes to conflict-related sexual violence. Thirdly, it was also mentioned that it would be a great initiative to establish a fund to support victims. I want to line out that such a fund already exists. The International Criminal Court has a victims fund, and it is possible to sponsor that. It is possible that states pay into this victim fund. Austria, for instance, will do so for the very first time this year. And I know that it's also possible to earmark the money you donate for special victim groups. And so it is possible with this fund that already exists under the Rome Statute, can be used for psychological, but also individual support of victims, individuals, and also communities. I think in this regard, it's also important to respect that. And last but not least, I'm very grateful that we managed to have this record in the kind of fast track and bring it very, very speedy here to the Assembly, because it's not only important to speak about it, it's really important to act on it. And I hope that this report gives us all a basis that we really can eradicate this atrocity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bayer. Now, if she wishes to speak, Chair of the committee, Ms. Maria Mezanseva has 3 minutes.
Teşekkürler, Chair. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, it's a big and huge privilege and a very important role which I have taken just yesterday as a chairwoman of the committee. But you know, back in March, when we were getting rid of those who started and restarted the aggression against all of us, who have brought us to the terrible figures of the war crimes within which a high number is rape, within which rape is used as not only a weapon, but also a damage to the long-lasting causes and traumas which not every individual can deal with. And it's very unfortunate that our continent is experiencing various wars and armed conflicts, even though with the dedication of a rapporteur, and I thank you, dear Petra, highly on that, and dear Penelope and the Secretariat, that this timely report will not only be the words, but it suggests that all these war crimes being committed have one cause, which was the crime of aggression, and it recalls International Tribunal, which we will vote on the 5th resolution already within 11 months only. Colleagues, war crimes is something, these two words can be very particular when it comes to rape. And I would like to suggest you to hear several lines of what men, women, regardless age, young girls and also boys might be experiencing in Ukraine at the temporary occupied territories or in the battlefields as we speak right now. We have victims who are aged, according to the UN information, from 4 years old to 80 of different gender. As of December 2022, according to our prosecutor's office, there were 155 cases, but forget about the numbers, there are many more, of the people who experienced rape, genital mutilation, forced nudity, threats and attempt rapes, coercion to observe sexual violence. These cases were mentioned in the capital of Kiev, in its region, in my home region, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Lugansk, Mykolaiv, and I can go on and on. But it's not only about the European continent. We set a good example for those countries which are still thinking to join the Council of Europe or Istanbul Convention and considering this at a governmental level. Colleagues, there was also a suggestion to co-share the information, as Lord Griffiths mentioned, on how we can trace back the memories of the victims, collect the evidence, and bring the perpetrators to justice. These several pages are bringing so much difference to the 46 member states, to the victims, their families, and those who can't be seeking for justice any longer because they are simply dead. Thank you so much for this tremendous work. Colleagues, I encourage you to vote in favor for this report.
Thank you, Maria. The debate is closed. The Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination has presented a draft resolution, document 15677, to which 12 amendments have been tabled. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 5, 11, 7, 1, 2, 3, 8, and 9 to the draft resolution, which were unanimously approved by the committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Ms. Mezanseva?
Yes, it is, dear Chairman.
Does anyone object? There seems no objection. Then I declare that amendments 5, 11, 7, 1, 2, 3, 8, and 9 to the draft resolution have been agreed. Now I call Mrs. Marina Bardina to support Amendment 4 in 30 seconds.
I will move the amendment. First of all, I would like to thank Petra Bayer for supporting all of the other amendments. About this one, we think it's very important to underline that the aggression Russian Federation on Ukraine started not in 2022, but in 2014. And there are victims, I know them personally, that experienced sexual violence since the war started in 2014, since the annexation of Crimea, and also the war in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Against the amendment?
J'ai assisté d'ailleurs à la réunion de commission. Cet amendement a été rejeté parce que nous avons bien expliqué, et l'auteur du rapport a bien expliqué, que la jurisprudence du Conseil de l'Europe et de son Assemblée parlementaire est de considérer l'invasion russe à partir de 2022. Alors, même si on comprend la position de notre collègue et de nos collègues ukrainiens, en l'occurrence, ici, nous voulons rester le plus objectif possible et garder la jurisprudence du Conseil de l'Europe et de son Assemblée parlementaire.
The committee rejected the amendment. I shall now put to the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Please display the results. So, the amendment is carried. Okay. So, amendment 4 is agreed. Carried. Okay, thank you. Yes, agreed. We move to Amendment 12. I call Olena Komenko to support Amendment 12 in 30 seconds, if she is here.
Mr. President.
The point of order about.
It shows that I'm unable to vote, and I don't know why, because I was one of the speakers of this panel, even I'm a substitute, but it was told that this is me who is voting, and it shows that I'm unable to vote, and I really would like to vote.
Now, of course, the voting is closed, and Secretariat took note of your intention. The voting is closed, okay? Now, is Ms. Komenko here to support Amendment 12? Does anybody else wish to support Amendment 12?
The Amendment 12 is stating, I would like to update it in a way that exploring the relation of this speech with prohibited and criminally sanctioned war propaganda and proper reaction on online platforms. So we should find the linkage between between glorifying war criminals and exploring this on online platforms. Thank you.
I have been informed that Ms. Bayer wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment as follows. I read it. Replace the words proper reaction on online platforms with countering and prosecuting them also online. In my opinion, the oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, do 10 or more members object to the oral sub-amendment being debated? There is no objection. Then there is no objection. Then I call Ms. Bayer to support her oral sub-amendment.
Yeah, but it was already voted unanimously in this way you just voted in the committee. Okay. According to us who were present, yes. But it's fine to call it exploring the relation of the speech with prohibited and criminally sanctioned war propaganda and concerning and prosecuting them also online. That, I think, is what you read out.
Yes. So anyhow, I think it should have been dealt here also in the plenary. Does anyone wish to speak against this oral sub-amendment? No. What is the opinion of the mover of the main amendment, Ms. Komenko?
Thank you.
Thank you, Senat. The committee is obviously in favor of the amendment. I will now put the oral sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Let's see the results. Okay, with the results, the sub-amendment is agreed to. We will now consider the main amendment as amended by the sub-amendment. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment as amended? I see no. What is the opinion of the committee on the amendment as amended? Ms. Bayer?
No. To vote in, we suggest to vote in favor, please, for amendment as amended.
Now I shall put the amendment 12 as amended to the vote. Please vote. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. It is with huge majority agreed. Thank you. Now, I call Heik Engelhardt to support Amendment 6 in 30 seconds. Does anyone else wish to support? If he's not here, she's there. Okay. So.
Sorry. Yes, I would like that there are some formulations that will make it more precise, and so I would like you to confirm the amendment. Thank you.
Okay. I have been informed that Ms. Bayer wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment as follows.
Yes, indeed. We would like to keep this paragraph, as this amendment number 6, but put it to a new place after 10.2 as a new 10.3, because the whole paragraph 10 deals with health institutions, and it fits better into 10 and not so much into 5.
In my opinion, the oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, do 10 or more members object to the oral sub-amendment being debated? It seems no. Then, in case this, I call Ms. Bayer to support the oral sub-amendment.
I support my oral sub.
Then, does nobody wishes to speak against it, I think? What is the opinion of the mover of the main amendment?
The committee is in favor with unanimity.
What is the opinion of the mover of main amendment, Ms. Engelhardt? You are here, okay then. Then, committee is obviously in favor. I will now put the oral sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Please display the results. Oral sub-amendment is agreed to unanimously. We will now consider the main amendment as amended. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment as amended? No. The committee is obviously in favor of the amendment. I shall now put Amendment 6 to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Please display the results. Okay, this Amendment 6 as amended is agreed to almost unanimously. Now, may I call Ms. Lesia Vasilenko to support Amendment 10 in 30 seconds.
President, the given amendment is actually on integrating into the text of the resolution a resolution that has already been passed and voted on in the UN and was motioned by France and Mexico, and which states that countries perpetrators of rape as war crime and sexual violence need to have their veto right suspended when they have one in the UN Security Council. Thank you.
There seems no. I have been informed that Ms. Bayer wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment as follows. I read, to add after the words signed by 104 UN member states, replace the words, add the words, and other initiatives restricting the possibility to veto. In my opinion, the oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, do 10 or more members object to the oral sub-amendment being debated? It seems no. Then, therefore, I call Ms. Bayer to support her oral sub-amendment.
Yes, I support the sub-amendment because there are also other initiatives that are really important to minimize or curb these vetoes, and this reflects other initiatives like from Liechtenstein and from Jennifer Trahan, and we also have them now language-wise included.
Does anyone wish to speak against the oral sub-amendment? It seems no. What is the opinion of the mover of the main amendment, Ms. Lezi Vasilenko? Support? Okay. The committee is obviously in favor of the amendment. I will now put the oral sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. Voting is closed. Display the results. Okay, it is carried out by huge majority. We will now consider the main amendment as amended. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment as amended? There is no. The committee is obviously in favor of the amendment as amended. I shall now put Amendment 10 to the vote. The vote is open. Let's close the vote and display the results. Okay. Amendment 10 is agreed to unanimously. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15677 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is open. Voting is closed. Display the results. Okay. With these results, the draft resolution as amended in document 15677 is adopted unanimously. Congratulations. Good. Unanimity makes us happy, really. I must remind you that the vote is in progress to elect 2 judges to the European Court of Human Rights. The poll will close at 3 p.m. Those who have not yet voted may still do so using the Skytel online voting platform. Thanks for all. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is now my honor and privilege to welcome to our Assembly the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Germany, Madam Annalena Baerbock. Madam Minister, we are very pleased to have you back in this chamber, a place you know from your time as a member of this Assembly. I can tell you many of our former colleagues have found their ways to various governments in our member state, and you, Madam Minister, you managed to become the leader of the German Foreign Affairs Ministry ever since 2021. We are very thankful to you that you take the time now, as one of the leading politicians in Europe, to exchange views with our parliamentarians in these challenging and, I may say, dangerous times. Until recently, Madam Minister, the prospect of a war of aggression on European soil seemed almost impossible. However, today, war has returned to Europe with all its atrocities, with the start of Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine, which was a blatant violation of international law. This war has caused already so many victims. Tens of thousands of people have been killed or wounded. Millions had to leave their homes and even a country. This war highlights the crucial importance of the founding principle of the Council of Europe, the pursuit of peace and democratic security can only be achieved through justice and international cooperation. We need the effort of every member state to safeguard the multilateral system founded now more than 70 years ago. We now are, Madam Minister, I believe, more than ever obliged to put our principles into practice. I would like to use this opportunity to sincerely thank you and the German government for taking a leading role in ensuring the organizational and financial sustainability of the Council of Europe in the aftermath of the Russian Federation's expulsion from the organization, as well for your strong support for the organization of the Reykjavik Summit of Heads of State and Government in half May, a summit which has been asked for on many occasions by this Assembly. Madam Minister, with your valuable presence here today, you reaffirm Germany's commitment to achieve a greater unity between all Council of Europe member states on the basis of protecting and promoting the rule of law, human rights and democracy, as the Statute of the Council of Europe stipulates. Therefore, we are looking forward, Madam Minister, to hear your intervention and then your answers to the questions that our delegates might pose to you. Please, the floor is yours, Madam Minister.
Mr. President, Madam Secretary of the General Council of Europe, Madam Secretary of the Parliamentary Assembly, members of the Parliamentary Assembly, ladies and gentlemen. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. These are the words of Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor and Nobel Peace Prize winner. His experience of the horrors of the Shoah and the Second World War made him a lifelong believer in the need to stand up for human rights, regardless where violations occur and to whom. Wiesel was convinced that when human rights are violated, that this is a warning signal for what there is to come. The Council of Europe was founded in 1949 with exactly this in mind. As an early warning mechanism against human rights violations, to prevent new wars, human suffering, and tyranny on the European continent. and as a common European home for democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. For all Europeans, protected by strong walls formed by the Convention on Human Rights and the Court of Human Rights. The Council also comprises more than 220 conventions and treaties. And probably, if we are all frank, no one in this room, maybe except for the President and the Secretary General, could name all of them. And feel free to do the math on how many bilateral treaties it would need to replace them. With all these conventions, with the European Court of Human Rights and its monitoring mechanisms, the Council is setting the highest human rights standards. Through its rulings, the Court has strengthened women in their fight against domestic violence. It has bolstered the freedom of the press, and it has obliged us as governments to build polling stations that are accessible to persons in wheelchairs and with other disabilities. Moreover, the Court is currently pushing towards intergenerational justice in groundbreaking cases, for example, on the climate crisis. This direct access that individuals have to an international human rights court is unparalleled in the world. And that is why Germany has made available additional means for the court. And we call on others, and actually I would say it very blunt and open. We urge others to step up their support as well. Because if we want a court to run in the future, it needs obviously sufficient financial sources. And let me be clear, the Court of Human Rights is something we can be more than proud of. However, we are also committed to social conventions and resolutions, to a fair income. And we cannot expect that with more cases at the core, less judges would do the same amount of work. So it's up to us, the government, to strengthen the court, our Court of Human Rights, also in the future. The court reflects our convictions as member states of the Council of Europe that our governments must put their people's fundamental rights first. Still, if we are honest to ourselves, we also probably, I would say again, all of us would have to admit that before we became parliamentarians and politicians, many of us might indeed had sometimes a bit confusion if they would have to explain the difference between the Council of Europe and the European councils. And did we actually all know that the anthem of Europe and the European flag, with its 12 stars, were first used by the Council of Europe? The President this morning reaffirmed me again that they do not really care about copyrights in this regard, as long as the EU also copies or finally ratifies the European Convention on Human Rights. Without joking, I believe that this is actually not a bad thing, even though as a journalist you can write, whoa, people confuse the Council of Europe and the European Council, and it shows the neglect of the Council of Europe. I think this is not the true story. I believe that younger people, and even people of my generation, I am being 42 years old, having the incredible luck to have lived my whole life in peace and not in a dictatorship, because being born in Western Germany, we took freedom and democracy for granted. But not because we neglected freedom and democracy, but because our ancestors built this Council of Europe, and we all believed that we could live in this house of freedom, of peace, all together forever. So the crucial point is not whether the Council of Europe or also the OSCE has played a strong enough role in the past. The crucial point is what we are doing now, Now, when our European peace order, when the Council of Europe, the OSCE, is being under attack. This is our responsibility as politicians of our generation of this time. Because Russia's war of aggression is not only a war against Ukraine, it is a war against the common European peace order. So what we have done in the last months was crucial. And I would like to thank and applaud you also here in the Council of Europe, that you have shown Putin that he would never succeed in destroying Ukraine, but that he would also never succeed in destroying our common home of peace, the Council of Europe. But we have to be also self-reflective, because we have seen also what we neglected in the past too much is the early warning system of this Council of Europe. Because when human rights are undermined or disregarded, these are early warning signs Wiesel was talking about. And ladies and gentlemen, we have such warnings have been there in the past. When our friends and partners in Central and Eastern Europe, and in particular in the Baltic, pointed to Russia's aggressiveness, especially my country did not listen carefully enough. When we saw the show trials against Alexei Navalny, when we saw Russia ignoring judgments by the European Court of Human Rights calling for his release, and when we saw Russia's refusal to sign the Istanbul Convention and drastically curbing women's rights, these were all early warning signs, and we didn't see them. We didn't take action. As early as in 2017, Russia changed its laws on domestic violence so that men, husbands, partners, who beat up their wives would get in legal trouble, not while they are beating their wives, but the law has been changed. You would have to beat your wife since 2017 in Russia repeatedly. She has to be sent to hospital, and then the criminal law would act. That should have sent a clear and loud warning, because women's rights are a yardstick for the state of our democracies. When women aren't safe in a society, no one is safe. And when human rights are not respected in a country, then ultimately peace and freedom are at risk. President Putin has made this obvious. His language of rape for years, his repression at home goes hand in hand with his attempt to destroy Ukraine and our common European peace order. That is why I'm convinced that today the Council of Europe, as an early warning mechanism, is more important than ever. Its work for human rights makes a crucial difference to people across Europe. And to be clear, Europe is bigger than the EU. The Convention on Human Rights and the Council of Europe, they create a common European home for human rights and democracy for almost 700 million people. 700 million people who, thanks God, do not look alike, do not dream alike. They have different traditions, different histories, and different plannings for the future. But 700 million people, all united by their firm belief in fundamental rights. I had the privilege of seeing what this actually means, fundamental rights. When I spoke with teenagers in Kharkiv earlier this month, I was at different spots in Kharkiv and saw all the destruction. But actually what touched me most was my last stop at the heating point set up with so much care, and I would even have to say love. We were sitting around a table, there was a warm stove, and we were offered tea and cookies because it was minus 12 degrees outside. And I was sitting with different teenagers. Their school had been destroyed in the early beginning of that war. So I was asking them, where do you go to school? And they looked at me and said, our school has been destroyed. So they haven't been to a school because not only their school had been destroyed, but many schools in Kharkiv had been destroyed for almost an entire year, because going to a makeshift school would be too dangerous. Because Kharkiv is a place 35 kilometers away from the Russian border. So if there is a rocket being targeted at the Kharkiv school, like before, there is no single air defense system which can prevent that this rocket would not hit their school again. They have 45 seconds to hide, and 45 seconds is obviously way too little to hide. You can only pray. So I asked them, what do you do if you're not going to school? And the impressive thing is that even in a partly destructed town, they have online teaching in classrooms. And I said, what are you doing otherwise if you have 45 seconds only to pray because you cannot hide? And one of the girls told me, well, I used to play volleyball, but obviously also my volleyball pitch is being destroyed. And I'm 16 years old. I normally hang around with friends, but also this is not possible anymore. So actually, even though these school children, these teenagers, survived, they are not living a normal life like teenagers. They hide every day and night, praying that the next rocket will not hit them. So when I asked them, why did you leave? Why didn't you leave? This girl, the 16-year-old, said, well, I left with my parents to Italy. But obviously, she came back. And I asked her, why did you come back here? Coming back to your neighborhood of Saltikva, which was wiped out by the bombs. When we were driving through them, you could see still the coffee table in a house which has been partly destroyed. People just drinking coffee before the rocket hit their home. She simply said, with tears in her eyes, because this is my home. Even though my home is now a prison, because I cannot go to school, I cannot go to volleyball, I cannot go out with my friends anymore. This is my home. This is where I want to be. This is where I want to survive if I'm not dying. So the only thing this girl and all her friends were asking for is to live a simple, normal life again, an everyday life where you go out as a teenager to meet your friends, to play volleyball, and to go to school. It is this girl's simple wish for a life in freedom, in peace, and with basic human rights that brings home to me what our agenda here at the Council of Europe is all about. Or, if you want to put it big, as German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer said it here at the Council of Europe when it was founded. The Council of Europe is the soul of Europe. It is our duty to keep this soul alive. That is why we are here. That is why I'm speaking here as the German Foreign Minister. That is why you are here. And you are coming back every month to work for our European soul, to solve it, for every person in Europe, for the teenagers in Kharkiv. To make sure that we are not missing the warning signals of human rights violation that can lead to violence and war. And to assure that the fundamental freedoms of women, men, and children are better protected every single day. Their rights to live a life in dignity and freedom. Yes, I believe we need the Council of Europe today more than ever to put the power of those rights above the power of might. President Putin wants to drag Europe back in a past dominated by power politics, where states can trample on individual rights in the pursuit of imperial glory, where rulers dispose of their citizens like pawns in geopolitical chess games. That is why, in the face of Russia's war, neutrality was not an option. We had to make a choice between injustice and justice, freedom and oppression, between standing on the side of the aggressor and standing on the side of the victims, the teenagers in Kharkiv. And we did. The Council of Europe, we all together adopted a clear and united stance against Russia's war. We jointly voted to expel Russia from the Council. And we made clear that the Council stands with the brave women and men and children of Ukraine who are fighting for their country and their freedom, but also for democracy and human rights on the entire European continent. Because the Council is not a geographical concept. Because the Council unites us in the concept of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. But we have also to critically assess why we did not fully recognize the early warning signals. This is why at the last meeting of the Committee of Ministers in Turin in summer, I advocated for a fourth summit of the Council of Europe that will now take place in Reykjavik under the Icelandic presidency. At this upcoming summit, we will have an opportunity to set up the Council for a new era in European history. We know that institutions are only as strong as the political and financial support they get. And that means we also have to give the Council the financial and other means it needs, as I said in the beginning. In this era marked by Russia's war, we can no longer take the progress of liberty and human rights in Europe for granted. Fundamental rights and freedoms are under pressure on too many fronts. Therefore, if we want to show that despite repression and war, the power of democracy and the soul of Europe remain unbroken on our continent, then we have to stand up and fight for them. Let us keep this in mind as we prepare for the Reykjavik summit, building on all our valuable ideas and suggestions. And there are many floating around. You took a decision just these days, and I would like to focus on three crucial points for this summit. First, the summit should reaffirm our joint commitment to the core values of the Council of European democracy and human rights. Member countries they are all different. They are all different. But what we all wish for is to bind us all in the Council is. So let me say loud and clear. All member states have for years the Turkish authorities that there has finally been a visit. But this is why the Committee of Ministers has in the Turkish authorities to release Osman Kavala. It is what our citizens accept. Fully adopt the Council of Europe's legal instrument protect from ourselves might be months. I invite all member states than every other the Council of Europe has achieved as crucial as that new rooms and more inhabitants. And that is to the European Convention, new generation of human rights. Democracy, the digital revolution, that how entire industries work, or how scientists predict storms and droughts. Aggressive advertising, and that autocratic democratic task. In the Council of Europe, we are working on a convention on the analysis. Together, we can ensure that adopted this year. And finally, there's a third point, we should the political party. And all of a sudden, she said, to relate, you have conventions where not arguing about democracy, human rights to be one geographical pattern. And I mean, this is really interesting when you're talking about AI. And I saw on a tiny sheet of paper, because when you're in a prison, toilet paper sent from a prison. I seek peace and a better future for them and their children. For them and their children. Than a big institution with a lot of money. Because with its advice on how to know it better than me about the hidden borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. To the 16-year-old who came back from Italy, these words must be a concrete call on us to stand.
True advocate of the cause and role of the Council of Europe. Much other questions we can take. First I call.
I'd like to ask you if you could further detail what you think are concrete and critical role in the EU enlargement process.
Shorter and sharper now. Well, first of all, be this and this, because this is a perfect excuse for politicians. If you do not have the financing of an institution, and the employees of this house shouldn't wonder whether their payment will not fulfill this task. So my first goal for the report is one thing, but acting afterwards, and I think institution is only as strong as much it keeps next summit to really focus on the new human rights.
But I understand that you are in agreement with our assembly 2 tanks to Ukraine. But Germany has been...
Not to hide away from an answer because you can just read the answer. Not to hide away from an answer because you can just read the answer. Support for a big international. This war is not only led by military, definitely have to do more also on humanitarian aid, on winter help, on a support with the stabilization and especially with a...
Minister, thank you very much. We don't have human security. But, Madam Minister, actual violence in conflict situations, so yes.
Because words only matter when they come into practice. However, I would say rape is just normal in a war. But speaking out back then, finally there, also not with the International Criminal Court, when I was in Den Haag, for example, easier also for a prosecutor in Germany to in war. So coming back to your question, we have to, as in Ukraine, we have to collect the evidence now, but naming them today is the first step. This is more than true because we had a legal debate yesterday. Our strongest power is that the people in Europe believe and have the trust.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Now I call on...
Germany's refusal of these essential resources to Ukraine. Why can't the German government and parliament?
Mr. Minister.
To Ukraine. If we start or continue the actors, we are discussing things and we are taking action last days. Yes, we have to do more to defend Ukraine. Yes, we have to do more to defend Ukraine. Yes, we have to do more.
Political groups is Mr. George Katrougalos from Greece, and he speaks on behalf.
Where do you stand now? Second, or do not comply with their international commitments.
Every European country, be it UK or be it Germany or be it Poland, Germany, your colleagues before you are calling for common weapon delivery. Ukraine, that obviously the munition doesn't work, competitive partners, but I believe if we move forward also in areas of conflict, of massive human rights violation, anyhow it's always a single delivering weapons now to Ukraine, even though this is a...
Madam Eda Gichaler and Mr.
The people of Nagorno-Karabakh are no longer held under siege. Madam Minister,
from Russia. In the same time, in some region, my question is very simple. What is the German government?
Sie waren ja letzte Woche in Den Haag beim
Internationalen... Alexei Koncharenko from Ukraine.
Thank you. My colleagues...
Mr. Minister, I told you...
So I also understand your question, but my discussion here, and I've experienced over the last months, and I would like to share, if we do one step, then the other step would follow. And this makes it so complicated for us. So I also understand, unfortunately, that the aid support right now, because the strategy is also from Putin in, and we will give an answer. I can promise you this.
But let's not, we don't even have figures. The International Committee of the Red Knights to Putin that this is not possible, because if he would be ready for diplomacy, don't speak about it because we don't have secured numbers. The criminal court, together with the EU actors, to trace the tracks. Where did I think the most important one is to not be silent. Obviously, because we are not only and treaties, and I find it quite impressive that in a time of war, showing that unfortunately we are not only make sense if there's also access from also very much for this discussion. It shows what we are, a democracy and
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. So on the Skytel online voting system, the seating is adjourned.